In the animal kingdom, intelligence has evolved in many different ways in many different creatures. The level of intelligence varies between the species, but scientists have found that the New Caledonian crow is the most intelligent.
Scientists just fed thousands of hours of crow recordings into a next-gen AI, expecting simple behavior patterns. Instead, the AI sent back something out of a sci-fi nightmare. It decoded their calls, exposed their maps, and revealed the truth.
These are too many negative characteristics for people today, who no longer have the unspoiled perspective of earlier generations.
Crows have been watching us, tracking us, talking about us. Their noise is actually a communication network, one detailed enough to probably identify you by name and broadcast your daily habits whether you like it or not.
They can also recognize faces and can hold a grudge against someone who was rude to them for several years.
You already have a crow reputation, and today we're going to find out what it says. Bird brain? Not quite the insult. Before we try to figure out what these birds are saying, we should first understand what kind of birds we are dealing with, because these aren't your average birds. They're the clever neighbors who've been studying us for years. The truth is, if intelligence had feathers, it would definitely be a crow.
Corvids are mischievous, playful, and extremely intelligent.
They're part of the Corvid family, alongside ravens, magpies, and jays. Scientists like to call this group the feathered apes. And here's why. For the longest time, we've always thought humans were the only tool-making mammals. But then in 1960, Jane Goodall made a shocking discovery: apes could make tools too. But that was it. They were the animals we rated as being intelligent. With birds, we just thought of them as dumb, especially since they don't have a cerebral cortex. So for decades, scientists believed they were incapable of any higher thinking. But recently, researchers have discovered that a different part of the bird brain, the pallium, has evolved to do many of the same tasks as the cerebral cortex. So yeah, calling someone a bird brain might not be quite the comeback you thought it was. Back to the feathered ape thing. Birds' brains, in relation to their body size, are almost as big as a chimpanzee's. They use tools, recognize faces, and even pass down knowledge through generations, just like apes. And there's experimental evidence supporting this. We'll start with the most famous one of them, the mask study from the University of Washington. In 2006, John Marsluff, a wildlife biologist and specialist on crow behavior at the University of Washington in Seattle, with his team of fellow researchers, decided to do something to test crows' emotions. They trapped 7 different crows and decided to do the test on them. To test the theory that crows could remember the faces of those who would try to trap them, Marsluff and members of his lab would wear masks fashioned from the faces of friends and students, randomly assigning them to be friendly or dangerous. When they were feeding the crows or tending their cages, they'd wear the friendly masks.
An animal that isn't a mammal at all, but a bird, crows, or more generally, corvids.
But when they were capturing the crows, they wore the dangerous ones. Then, shortly after being trapped, the birds would be temporarily put to sleep, and high-resolution PET-like images would be captured of their brains, kind of like an MRI does for humans. The researchers would then look for the synaptic activity of the brain cells, and how they differed after viewing humans wearing the different masks. The crows were, of course, released back into the campus. Then years later, the craziest thing happened. Marsluff and his team decided to enter the campus wearing those dangerous masks. When they did, the crows remembered vividly. So vividly that Marsluff recalled an incident while wearing the mask when 47 out of 53 crows he encountered vehemently scolded him. And it wasn't just him, anyone else on his team who wore the dangerous masks got mobbed. Meanwhile, those who wore the good ones, or even another neutral one of former US President Dick Cheney, weren't bothered at all. Remember, there were only 7 test subjects. So apparently, the message had gotten passed down to other crows, including even some of their offspring. And that tells us something very big. Crows don't just recognize faces, they communicate what they know as well. Back in 2014, a researcher named Sarah Gelbert at the University of Auckland ran a famous experiment to test how well New Caledonian crows understand cause and effect. The test was inspired by the old Aesop's fable, where a crow raises the water level of a pitcher by dropping stones into it. Instead of a pitcher, Gelbert used clear tubes filled with water and placed a piece of floating food inside. Some tubes were designed so that dropping stones would actually raise the water level. Others were rigged so that it wouldn't work at all. The question was simple. Could the crows figure out which tube would give them access to the food? Before running the test, researchers had already spent weeks watching how these birds behave in the wild. New Caledonian crows are famous for making their own tools.
They use tools to forage and to solve complex problems.
They snap off straight sticks and use their beaks to carve a little hook at one end. With this hook, they can pull fat grubs out of tiny holes in rotting wood. They do this because stabbing the grub with a plain stick would only burst it and turn it into mush, so the hook makes it possible to pull the grub out cleanly. The crows also create another type of tool from the leaves of the pandanus plant. These leaves have tough edges lined with natural barbs. A crow will make a series of neat cuts along the leaf and then tear upward, producing a long, narrow strip with a jagged, barbed edge. This strip works like a natural rake, letting the bird drag insects out from beneath layers of leaf litter. Because the crows already showed such skilled, deliberate tool-making in nature, Gelbert wanted to see whether they also understood the basic concept behind how objects interact, whether they could look at a situation and figure out what would actually work. When presented with the water tube puzzle, they consistently chose the functional tubes and ignored the useless ones. In other words, they didn't just use tools, they understood why the tools worked. Then, on the other side of the world, in Japan, crows were filmed dropping nuts onto traffic lights, waiting for cars to crack them, and swooping down when the light turned red. They even performed what scientists call causal reasoning, the ability to understand not just that something works, but why it works. A crow can look at a puzzle box and think, if I drop this here, it will move there, which will get me food. And yet, even after all this extensive evidence, we still dismissed their chatter as background noise. But imagine this. If a creature can remember faces, share warnings, and pass knowledge down generations, what makes us think their vocal world is random? Maybe it's not random at all. Maybe it's structured. Maybe it's language. Just one we've never had the right ears to hear. And now, AI has become that ear. Because the same kind of neural networks that decode human speech patterns, detect deepfakes, and analyze sonar pings, can now dissect the hidden architecture of animal sound. When researchers fed crow calls into these models, patterns began to emerge. Not chaos, but syntax. Certain sounds clustered around specific events. Humans approaching, food appearing, predators overhead. The deeper the AI listened, the clearer it got. Their calls weren't just black and white in the sense we'd always thought. Warnings or greetings. They carried context, identity, emotion. And the first thing the AI picked up on was how much of their world revolves around us. Eavesdropping on conversations that made no sense, initially. But how exactly did AI do that? How do you translate a bird? It's almost impossible, since animal songs don't actually come with subtitles. We hear a caw, but then we don't know if it means food or danger. The only way to make sense of it is to match sound to situation. So, researchers did something no one had ever done before. They recorded thousands of hours of audio clips from crow populations across North America. The data set included everything from frantic alarm calls during hawk attacks and quiet coos exchanged between mates, to the playful chatter around city dumpsters. Every sound was coming with context. Each clip was tagged, what the crow was doing, what other crows were nearby, what animals or humans were in sight, even what time of day it was. Then they fed it all into a machine learning model, the kind usually used for speech recognition. Think of the same technology that powers your phone's voice assistant, but now listening to birds. What came out wasn't noise. It was structure. The AI began clustering sounds into categories. Initially, the sounds were easy to decode, basic stuff, alarm calls, contact calls, and feeding calls. But then, the system started to detect patterns within the patterns, more complicated ones. The kind of subtle variations that human ears had always missed. Certain frequency shifts appeared only when specific humans were present. Others showed up in what looked like crow meetings, small groups where they seemed to discuss events from earlier in the day, and that's where things got eerie. Because in a subset of recordings, crows produced a distinct sequence of notes. Let's call it the red hat sequence. The AI noticed that sound only appeared when a specific person, a man often seen wearing a red hat, walked into the area. Days later, the same sound appeared again. When the same man reappeared, to the machine, it wasn't random. It was language tied to identity. It wasn't just human nearby. It was that human again. Researchers confirmed it through playback experiments. When they played that sound to a group of unrelated crows, they reacted aggressively, even though the man himself wasn't present. In short, the sound carried meaning, and it spread. And that is the first credible hint that we have, that crows use vocal labels, maybe even names, for specific individuals. And once that door opened, everything changed. AI started picking up subtler emotional tones, softer, low-frequency calls after the death of a group member, high-energy bursts when food was shared, rising pitch debates that looked like social disagreements. It was like watching a static-filled channel slowly come into focus, a whispering society revealing itself frame by frame. One scientist described it perfectly. It's as if we've spent centuries living next to a civilization, and we're only now realizing they've been holding meetings about us the entire time. Now, of course, that is a very interesting possibility, but then it raised a bigger, stranger question. What are they actually saying about us? And that's where it gets a bit uncomfortable. Our place in this discourse. Once the AI started translating the patterns, a theme started to appear. Humans were dominant in crow conversation. We appeared more in their conversation than other predators did, or even conversations about each other. We're basically their weather, their news, their gossip. The AI discovered that there were several recurring crow topics that were related to people. Certain calls signaled certain humans, especially when the birds had had a bad history with the people in question. There were also alert calls, sequences that spread quickly through flocks, warning of humans carrying weapons or nets. In one sequence, researchers observed something remarkable. A crow made an alarm call when a man approached carrying a long stick. But when the same man walked through later, empty-handed, the alarm never came. So basically, the call hadn't been about the person, it was about their intent. The crows weren't just reacting to stimuli, they were interpreting behavior. The AI mapped these signals across multiple groups and found that certain alarm calls spread like breaking news. A crow in one neighborhood could warn others miles away within hours through relay calling, an entire citywide network built on sound. So if you've ever thrown a rock or scared a crow once, there's a good chance hundreds more already know about it, and yet it's not all hostility. Other calls suggest crows share positive reports about kind humans, the ones who'd feed them or protect nests. Some flocks even appeared to reward friendly humans by dropping shiny objects nearby, glass beads, bits of foil, or in rare cases, coins. You know, interesting finds as a way of saying, thank you for not being nasty like everyone else. AI analysis found these gift zones correlated with specific call patterns that scientists now believe signal gratitude or alliance. Of course, it's still all speculative, but if it's true, then it means crows don't just remember us. They judge us. They label us. They tell stories about us. And now, with AI decoding their syntax, we're beginning to read the headlines in their language. The biggest revelation isn't that crows talk about us, it's that they might understand us far better than we ever imagined. Because for centuries, we've studied them from afar, but all this time, they've been studying us right back. And the moment AI made that visible, it didn't just decode bird calls. It cracked open the uneasy truth that we've never really confronted. Maybe we were never the only intelligent observers on this planet, and then it gets even more interesting. Because when the AI finally reached deep pattern decoding, something unexpected surfaced. There were clusters of crow communication that didn't match danger calls, food alerts, territory signals, or even human labeling. These were different, longer, more structured, almost narrative. At first, analysts thought this was a mistake, maybe background noise, or even corrupted audio. But then, when scientists cross-referenced dozens of recordings, they realized the same structures appeared across multiple crow territories, sometimes miles apart, sometimes even days apart. The AI highlighted one specific pattern in red, a repeated vocal construction researchers had never seen before. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't a label, it wasn't a food call, it was commentary. The birds were giving their opinions on us humans, not just in simple terms of danger or food, but in much more layered terms of emotional behaviors. Matters of the heart. Now, of course, that's not the first time we're seeing these birds display some level of emotional qualities. We've seen them express frustration, care for each other with gifts, but the biggest one has to be their crow funerals. When one crow dies, the other crows gather around the body in what scientists call funeral behavior. They don't just stare and move on, like pigeons do. Instead, they become silent, they circle and observe. Some will even touch the dead body with their beak, almost like checking one last time. The gatherings aren't necessarily about sadness in the human sense. They're about learning what happened, identifying threats, and reflecting danger back into their community. But the tone, the stillness, is what feels like mourning. And if these birds are capable of such layered emotions, it makes you wonder about the intelligence gap between us and them. For decades, we assumed that gap was as wide as a canyon, a comfortable distance. We'd built skyscrapers, rockets, and quantum computers, and all they could build were nests case closed. But once the AI models started decoding crow communication, that canyon began to shrink, and fast. Because intelligence isn't just tools or technology, it's memory, it's cooperation, it's strategy. It's the ability to share information, sometimes across entire regions, without ever writing a single word down, and that's where the crow world becomes something else entirely. When the researchers mapped the communication data geographically, they found something unexpected. Certain vocal structures appeared again and again in territories that were miles apart, not identical, but close enough that the AI flagged them as shared linguistic units. In human terms, that's a dialect. In evolutionary terms, that's culture. Think about how wild that is. Small groups of crows, separated by cities, forests, and highways, still managed to maintain shared rules of speech. They weren't just learning from parents. They were picking up things from neighbors, rivals, strangers even. The AI even picked up call patterns that changed over time, almost like slang spreading. One call sequence, first recorded in Seattle, appeared again 6 months later in Vancouver, but this time it was slightly modified, yet you could see it was clearly related. It spreads the way a meme spreads, efficiently, invisibly, silently, across thousands of birds. And that's when scientists started questioning their assumptions. Because if crows could pass on new behaviors, and new vocal patterns, and new strategies for dealing with humans, then they're not just reacting to the world, they're teaching themselves about it, in real time. Some crow families have learned to crack nuts by dropping them onto crosswalks. Others wait for garbage trucks because they know bags tear. Some use tools. Some can count. Some can plan thefts in pairs. We've always tended to think that intelligence climbs one ladder, with us on top. But from the looks of things, crow intelligence isn't climbing our ladder at all. They built their own ladder, a parallel system, optimized for survival, for memory, for aerial awareness, for teamwork, for observation. And in some areas, they might as well outperform us. Crows don't forget your face. They analyze how you move. They predict what you'll do. They remember where food was months ago. They communicate future plans. They coordinate attacks. And now, thanks to AI, we know they talk about all of this. So that intelligence gap we'd mentioned earlier, it wasn't a canyon. It was simply a blind spot humans climbed upward in technology. Crows expanded outward in communication. We built machines. They built networks. And now, for the first time, our digital network has intersected with theirs, which raises one enormous, uncomfortable question. If crows have a system this advanced, what's going to happen when they realize we understand it? And maybe, just maybe, they already have. Because in the final days of the study, something strange happened. The calls changed, just slightly. Something surfaced, a new pattern, a new rhythm. The AI hadn't detected before, almost like a correction, or a question. Researchers don't know what it means yet. The model is still trying to map it. But whatever it is, it's spreading quickly, flock to flock, a lot faster than any previous vocal shift they recorded. It's as if the crows noticed something was off, something watching them back, something listening. And maybe that's the real twist here. For the first time in history, humans are not the only ones running an experiment somewhere above us, perched on the power lines, on rooftops, on street lamps. The crows are running one too, and we have no idea what their hypothesis is.